Hello and welcome back to the Business Addicts podcast. I'll let Jamie do the intro today.
You didn't tell me that was coming.
Good. I'm glad I caught you off guard.
I'd love to introduce Amy Collette. We met a little over a year or so ago, and everything in this world fascinates me, but the heart that you have, just I can feel it. And so Amy does work with helping people share their stories. And I want for business owners to realize that it can be super powerful to dig in and go through the process of creating and writing a book so that they can create legacy and just clarity for their family on their legacy, and maybe even clarity for themselves in the process. So Amy, I'd love to dig in and hear a little bit more about you, the work that you do, and how you help clients in this space.
Awesome. Thank you for the nice introduction, Jamie. And thank you, Kevin and Jamie, for having me on your podcast. Yeah, I am super passionate about people telling their stories, and I've become a real advocate for the actual art of storytelling because it can make such a huge difference in your business. So it doesn't matter whether you want to write a book or not, you should be telling stories. And I don't say should a lot, but it's really helpful for all of us entrepreneurs, business owners, to be telling our stories because that's how humans connect. Right? That's how we've always connected from, caveman days, is through story, whether it's, a painting on the cave wall or actually sharing stories around a fire after dinner. It's how we get to know each other and how we get to know, ooh, that's a kind of person I want to connect with and have a relationship with.
Can we get a little bit about your story? Give us an idea of why you got into what you are doing now, and maybe start as early as you want.
Yeah. Okay. So I talk a lot about origin story. And this is one of those stories that you can be telling in your business to really connect with the people that you most want to serve. And I used to tell what I call the resume story. And the resume story is like, oh, I've been a professional writer and editor for a couple of decades. And, so then when I wrote my own book, I learned all the hard lessons, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now. And that is a part of my story. That's the resume part of the story. But the real origin story, I kind of stumbled across, and that's what made me so passionate about it. I started telling this story in a storytelling group. It was very intimate, and I was challenged to tell a harder story, a more personal story. And so I dove into this story that I never told. And that was about growing up in the chaos of an addictive family, And so that was really eye opening to me when I told this story. So I grew up when I was about 14. My dad was a hardcore alcoholic, and just I was so used to promises broken, lies told, all that kind of stuff that I was a really cynic at that young age. I didn't really believe people could change, and I just believed that anything that came out of his mouth was positioned to help him stay in his addiction rather than to have a real relationship with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I actually witnessed his recovery and sobriety, I was amazed. I was like,
Wow.
oh, maybe I have to now rethink those convictions, right? And so this was a long-term thing. It took me at least 10 years, after he got sober for me to really trust that it was going to stick and that it was a real thing. But I became transformed by his transformation, right? Like I got to see real transformation happen in my real life. And that made me a believer in the power of transformation, and not just that it's possible, but that that you can make a transformation in your life anytime that you choose to.
Yeah, well, that's and very appropriate for this podcast in our background. So
Yeah.
thank you. Along the way, what have you been learning?
Yeah, so that, looking back on that experience and a lot of other experiences, I realize how important it is to tell stories. Because, like, when I tell that story um, in a group, because I tell that story when I teach people how to tell their own origin story, that I see different reactions. Some people start crying because they relate so much to my story because it's their story too, or something very similar. But I see a lot of people, touch their heart or do something that, you can tell they're connecting with me through that story. And that's the really powerful part. So it just shows me more and more. And the more I teach this and the more I tell my story, I hear people's stories and I see these connections get made for them in their own mind. Like my telling that story connected me to my own story, right? So it made a connection to me first and then to other humans, right? And I think that's really important. And so
Yeah.
that's the journey of telling your story, whether you're telling it in your business or telling it in your book. And it's something that I'm, really on fire about because I see the kinds of connections and transformation that telling your story can help other people have.
Yeah. Yeah, that's seems like the intersection of your work and what we've been doing or attempting to do it at least, and
Yeah.
definitely succeeded at some times, some episodes, maybe most of them. But um, I saw something the other day. They said, um, like one of our deepest needs, maybe our deepest need, is for connection. And so, if one easy way to judge ourselves or to evaluate ourselves on whether we're creating connection is like they use the example of a husband comes home and the wife says, "I'm really tired," and um, if his response is, "Oh, all right, we'll go to bed," then there's not really a connection created. But if his response is, um, "Okay, what's causing you to, you know, what's been going on?" You know, give her a chance to talk that through and create a connection, and then maybe it would be appropriate. Hey, I'll do the dishes and cover the kids. Feel free to go to bed if you want. And
Yeah.
maybe then she just is free to go on the couch or something. But I just like that little evaluation for us and even our clients, like um, in all the little things that we have, the situations and even the big situations, but even in the little situations, are we taking the opportunity to create a connection? Or are we just saying, "Oh, okay, I get it. Thanks for sharing."
Yeah. What I hear so much when you talk about that, Kevin, is there's a deep need for connection. But one of the reasons, or two of the reasons that we want that connection is to know that we're not alone,
Mm.
that we're being heard, and to know that we belong. And so, in your example, and in the example of being a coach or a consultant, and your clients are struggling with something,
Mm-hmm.
when you can take a few minutes to dig deeper into what's behind that and how are you feeling and what's going on for you, it gives them the opportunity to connect with you, but also to feel like, oh, I'm not alone here. This person is with me to help
Yeah.
me work this through. And I belong with this. I'm not some crazy person that's just, going off the rails over here, but that maybe this is, other people have experienced this and we can talk about it, just based on our human experience and connection.
Yeah. Yeah. So this season of the podcast is about family business, and it's one reason that we've brought you on. And I've been reading this book called Family Wars, where it's full of stories about family businesses, sometimes very big family businesses that actually there's one brand, one business that's 10 miles down the road. I didn't even know it started as a family business, right? And that's probably true of a lot of businesses. But
Yeah.
the stories are tragic in a lot of ways. Yet they also tell the story of perseverance over time. These brands they're writing about them because they're still here, and the issues along the way were sometimes big, but they got past them and they worked through them. So when you think about stories and you're writing books and such, what have you noticed, and is there any connection to family business?
Well, yeah, the first connection is that I grew up in a family business. My dad ran a small business, and all of his kids worked for him at different times, and did various things. So I learned some skills that way. I got to see what it looked like to be an entrepreneur, the struggles as well as the wins, and really understand personality wise what makes a successful entrepreneur. So that was a great education for me. And out of four kids in the family, I'm the only one who's an entrepreneur who's gone down that path. Probably because we all got scared off at an early age
Yeah,
by how hard
yeah.
it was.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have worked with clients who have written stories about their own family businesses. And it sounds very similar to what's in the book that you're talking about, where there's ups and downs, there's tragedies, there's traumas, even including fraud and things like that, where somebody's embezzling money and they're, your relative. That's not an easy or fun thing to deal with, but it's not that much different from other entrepreneurial ventures or businesses. So, yeah, I see all kinds of, you just deal with them in a more intimate way because it's not just, you don't leave those problems when you leave work because you're coming home and, yeah, or seeing
Yeah,
those people on the
exactly.
weekends and holidays and things like that. So it makes for an opportunity, I think, to go into those conversations in a deeper way because it means more.
Mm-hmm. Well, congratulations to you for being the one out of your family that kept the entrepreneurship journey going.
Yeah, thank
It's
you.
not easy.
Amy, we were talking a little bit before the podcast, and I shared that there are some potentially big changes happening in our life and that we feel called to sell our house and maybe make some big moves. And this isn't something that was on the radar. It just sort of came out of the blue. And then you shared that you had a similar story. So I'd love for you to share that with the audience.
Yeah, it's funny. This is a story I also don't tell very often anymore, but yeah, my husband and I both have kind of an entrepreneurial bent, but before that, we were working in corporate jobs and just burning ourselves out. I see people doing that now where they're kind of on call all the time and they're stressed out and just thinking about work all the time. And we both tend a little towards the workaholic anyway. And so we were kind of using our entrepreneurial energy that way in other people's businesses. And so we went on a vacation to Mexico and we're sitting on the beach. Just finally, after a few days, you can finally kind of feel like you're relaxed and getting some rest. And we started having this conversation. We don't remember who brought it up first, but we sort of came to this at the same time. And maybe it was a message from God, that's telling us, okay, you need to make a change. And we made a tremendously big change. We decided that we were going to sell all our stuff. We didn't own a home yet, so that was, a little bit easier, but we sold all our stuff, put the rest in a little bit of storage in my mom's basement. And we went on the road in a van that we converted ourselves to be able to live in. So we were living that, hashtag van life way back in the 90s. And we did that for a year. And we started out, we lived in Alaska for the summer and worked up there. We traveled around, went to Hawaii. We have my husband's sister lives there, and we spent some time house sitting over there and, got to travel all over the continental US also. And it was just an incredible experience that bonded us together as a couple, I think, very much. and just gave us tremendous experiences that we'll never forget all over the country. So it was I I encourage you to, get out of your comfort level and stretch yourselves, because you'll find that, for you and your family it can really be life-changing.
It already has been for us, and we haven't even started. So,
Right.
did you feel like you connected to yourself and understood yourself better after that experience?
Yeah. What comes to mind, Kevin, when you ask that question is a pretty personal story. If I can get a little deeper.
Okay, go
Um,
for that.
yeah. So within the first 4 days on the road, we're driving to Alaska. Okay. So we've been through Montana. We're now in the beautiful vistas of Canada, going on the highway towards Alaska. And we just, the stress was gone, all the stress of like finishing up our jobs, getting ready to go, all that stuff. And, my mind just, was open to other things. And I felt like all of a sudden, about 4 days in, I heard God talking to me. I'm like, oh, you've been here all along. I just wasn't paying
Wow.
any attention, you know. But it was like it did help me reconnect to myself and what you become so connected to your identity with what you do that when you totally leave it and do something else, you have to come to terms with who you are. What's your identity without your job or without the place you live or that kind of stuff that grounds you in your day to day? Like, who are you? So that was a really big experience for me. And, of course, went on for the whole year. But that first thing about who am I? Like, how do I even relate to myself without, oh, I'm a this or I'm a that, or, those labels that I'd had all my life. I got to just be me.
Yeah, that is beautiful. Love that. What are the benefits that you've noticed about telling people stories?
I love that you asked that question. I just posted about it today. um, is there's a kind of an unexpected benefit from telling your story. And I'm talking about telling your bigger story in your book. And that is that, I've heard people say, oh, the book is all but written. It's just in my head. I just have to get it out of my head and onto the page, right? Well, that process of getting it out of your head and onto the page is a journey of personal development that not everybody sees coming, you know? Because in the process of telling your story, you are processing things you've been through in the past, and they may not all be pretty. They may not all be fun, because transformation often comes from things not being status quo, right? So they can be a positive change, like making a move that you want to do. But it can also be traumatic. It could be something that you did not see coming or did not necessarily want in your life, but you take something from that experience and create some transformation for yourself. So when you're reliving these stories and you're telling them for other people for the benefit of serving other people so that they can find transformation too, whew, you can come up against what I call fear dragons, right? And these fear dragons are, oh, does anybody really want to hear this story? Do I really want to get that vulnerable? What are people going to think of me if they know that I didn't always make perfect decisions or I made some flubs along the way? There's a lot of fears that can come up, including imposter syndrome. And I write about this in my new book, which is called Unleash Your Impact. It's about not just the journey of how to write your book, but it's about how to work through some of these fears that come up along the way. So I see that as an opportunity, right? I mean, coaches tend to look at these things of like, yes, this is an opportunity for you to work through this thing that may have been holding you back for a long time or keeping you from some other growth or connection. And so these fear dragons show up, and they look mean and scary, and uh, throw some flames your way. It's your opportunity to turn around and go, okay, no, no, you're not taking me down this time. I'm going to learn what I need to learn from you and move on and make this into my own fire. I call it reclaiming that fire for yourself. And so that's the real benefit and personal development journey that can happen when you really dive into sharing your story.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this podcast with what you just said, because for me, I didn't want this podcast. This was, I don't know if I've ever talked about this on the podcast. Probably have, but this is the podcast I didn't want to do. I didn't want to tell this type of story, get this vulnerable. But it's been the best gift to really work through that. And I know one thing I know I haven't mentioned before is there are some episodes that we've re-recorded. And like Jamie and I, especially early in the podcast, when Jamie and I would get on to record, and my editor and producer is my sister, and between the two of them, they would just not like my energy at all, and I'm just not there. I'm not gonna, and so we'd have to do it over. And so that was definitely confronting those dragons you're talking about. Really believing that I can have a vulnerable conversation with her, which she's my wife. You'd think that'd be easy, but in a different context, I wasn't emotionally ready for that, if you get what I'm saying. And so now it's a lot easier, but we did have to work, and they had to be willing to re-record sometimes, or just say, oh, that episode
Didn't work.
It's not going to work.
Yeah.
I remember that, especially with a couple that I did on my own, and I didn't even like them after I watched them. But the benefit of telling the whole story is, like, although the purpose of this podcast is to reach out to other people, it's been such a resource for me to be able to go through these episodes and to learn, and also it's telling a story over time that's even highlighting our own business and our own growth, and it's there to refer to. And I listen to episodes all the time that I've done a long time ago because I need to think about what we talked about back then, so
yeah.
So
Kevin, can I ask you a question?
Please. Yeah, absolutely.
How were you able to work through some of those fears of vulnerability and things that came up, maybe not connecting with yourself enough to be able to tell your story effectively? How did you work through and be able to do that on re-recording those episodes, or just, getting yourself in that place before you did that?
So during a lot of that time, Jamie and Karen and I had a business together. So what it would typically look like is, I would probably guess, like, Jamie would like stop the episode. No, this just isn't working. So Jamie's discernment is kind of what triggered that, and I would be able to feel that it wasn't working as well. It's just that sometimes I would try to force it, right? So how would I deal with it? We used a few different methods. I mean, mainly just them asking me questions about what's going on, why am I not here, and then whether or not I immediately was able to be vulnerable enough to answer that, or needed some time to work through it. That both happened. But yes, I had to be honest about what was an issue inside of me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, mainly let go of the fear, right? Let go of the beliefs that are causing the fear, causing the anxiety, and then be yourself and believe that you can be here and enjoy the process instead of making it so awkward and stressful.
Right.
What can you tell us about the process that you have?
I use some different techniques and tools to kind of help people access what's going on behind the scenes, because usually those stories are really old, right? They come from our
Oh yeah.
childhood. They come from, becoming survival mechanisms or coping mechanisms that we've used for a long, long time. And so I think one of those is I learned this. It's a sort of a gestalt therapy technique where you sit and talk to that fear or that gremlin or
Mm.
dragon or whatever you want to call it. And I have a chapter in my new book about that where I call it a conversation with shame, because in my experience, shame is underneath so many of those fears, and just like sharing that story that I told earlier, I never told that story because it was shameful, right? In our family, it was a huge secret that we thought we were keeping. And I'll bet we weren't. I'll bet everybody knew.
Yeah.
But we were making it look good and trying to keep that
Yeah.
secret hush hush and, making the lawn look pretty and everybody looked good when we left the house. But inside it was complete chaos, right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of us have some kind of shame or guilt about things. And so if you can sit down and like calm yourself down enough to have, I always picture this, whatever it is that I'm having a conversation with, like shame, sitting in a chair directly across
Mm.
from me and calming myself down enough so I can ask shame some questions,
Mm.
about, what's going on and uh, what's really happening and, even throw your worst at me and let me see what's going on, because keeping things secret is what holds us back. And so when you can get things out in the open and see what's really going on in your psyche, that is very telling. And, I think it's easier to let go of and release and say, yeah, I'm going to choose not to believe that anymore and let that hold me back. And it's a feeling of great freedom when you can do that and then move forward. Because like when I first told that story, I thought I would feel very shameful about it, and I didn't. I felt great. And that was really surprising and
Yeah.
very cool
So
for
that
me
the
to
story about
see.
your
And I was
dad.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not my shame. It's not,
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
shameful in the first place. But I had been taught that it was shameful and embarrassing and whatever. And so when I told that story and other people really connected to it, because I got people's feedback about how they, how I could tell the story better, or, if they felt connected to me when I told that story. And I realized it had a big impact on other people to share that story. And like, maybe it was worth telling. So
Yeah.
it was a huge thing for me to help me get over that shame. And so I use those techniques with others too.
Yeah. That is beautiful. I definitely had a lot of working through that. As you talk about it, a lot of memories are coming back. And recently I had the privilege of doing a podcast on a different podcast um, with a lady that had been divorced from her husband. And we talked about the two different sides of pornography, like her side as someone that was harmed by an addict, her husband, and my side as being the addict. And one thing that podcast highlighted the fact that a lot of times the shame is there, and we see a lot of these issues with religious people. And I thought that was a beautiful call out from her, because you'd think that would be a freeing thing to be religious, but because of because of shame, sometimes it isn't. And we need to, we have the privilege of addressing that, and then it can be a plus for us. But if we just keep it in the closet and don't deal with it, then yeah, it becomes a huge bondage that we're carrying around all over.
Yeah.
And hurting people around us. And so what have you seen? So can you give us an example of someone that's confronted this and worked through telling their story that you've worked with, and what happened? Like, what insights did they get?
Yeah. My new book is full of stories because I interviewed some of my authors because people work through all different kinds of things like perfectionism
Mm.
and but almost everybody confronts imposter syndrome. And of course they think they're the only one who ever has to deal with that, right? We isolate ourselves that way by not talking about it, by
Hmm.
feeling shameful or guilty about something. We really isolate ourselves when so many people around us are experiencing a very similar thing. So I'll give you a great example. There's an author named Amy Rezick, and she wrote a book about sales. And so, as a salesperson, you're very vulnerable. You're always, putting
Hmm.
yourself out there, open to rejection at every turn, but she is really an expert and she's a very popular speaker on the topic. And when I was interviewing her, I asked her about this because everybody says, uh, should I include this? Is this even relevant? Who cares about my stories and this kind of stuff? And she says, from working together, she came up with this idea that, it's not up to her to decide for everybody
Hmm.
else.
Hmm.
It's up to the reader to decide if they're interested in that, either
Wow.
in the book, because if you're interested in the topic, and drawn in by the cover and the description and that kind of thing, you're going to pick up that book and say, "Oh, this book's for me. I think I can get something out of this book." And so you leave it up to the reader or the listener of your story to decide how they feel about it. You can't decide for everybody else,
Hmm.
so it's really part of it is believing in the potency of your own experience. And that's a quote from another author I worked with. He said, and he was a therapist. He said, he asked the question of himself all the time: do you believe in the potency of your own experience? And
Hmm.
so many of us don't. We question that and we doubt that. But Amy's advice about let your reader, let your listener decide for themselves. It's not up to you. And how, what a great thing to give up is, making that decision for everybody else.
Oh, yeah. That I didn't. I guess I'm thinking there was some people, family, that didn't like the fact we were doing this, and I never thought it was. I like that. I like that thought. I've never thought about it that way, and I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. I think it shows a real deep respect
yes.
for others too. It shows respect for your own um, value and for the opinions of others, whether they like it
Hmm.
or not. That's absolutely
Hmm.
their thing, and it's not anything to do with you.
Yeah, that's pretty deep. That
Yeah.
to think about our life as having a purpose, and if we're gonna keep part of that back, it
Mhm.
can could definitely be selfish. Like, no, I can't share that. It might hurt someone, or it might discourage someone. Well, it could help someone. How do you know? How do I
Yeah.
know? Hmm. Interesting.
Amy, if you don't mind, I'd love to ask you a little bit about what you see could be possible for business owners that have created businesses and are looking to move into whatever is next for them. Like I want to normalize the conversation around entrepreneurs and the fact that they don't really retire. And if they do, it's 84, not 62. And um and that there's usually a point like maybe in their 60s where it's time for them to reinvent themselves and they don't really know what's next. And you mentioned identity, and when you left your jobs and go on this van life um, experience, that you kind of found yourself a little bit in that and really realized that your identity wasn't in your job. And then what is your identity? And we see that with business owners, that they don't want to give up their businesses because it is their identity. And I feel that, at a core level, understanding that it gives us the challenges that we need in that entrepreneurial spirit that we have. And it meets our needs and serves us in so many ways that sometimes it's hard to let go of that identity. But what is it that you've seen, or what is it that you'd love to see business owners consider when they think about their legacy, their future, and how writing a book could be part of that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jamie. And like this author, it's a book called Ignite Your Greatness by Barry Overton. He's a great example of someone who was really on fire to leave his legacy. He is an entrepreneur, and he's a serial entrepreneur. So he's changed things a few times. He's really made some big transitions in his life. But most importantly, he's made some really great epiphanies and connected the dots in a way that might be a little bit different than other people. And so he was very concerned with leaving his legacy and speaking more. And that's what I see in general, because a lot of my clients are in that age group that you're talking about, where they've been around quite a while. They've made some amazing successes. Of course, everybody's had failures too, right? And has made all different kinds of connections throughout their business life. And now they want to bring that thought leadership to the forefront, right? So they want to maybe step away from the day to day of their business and really step into that thought leadership, and helping other businesses and individuals to rise to the best that they can. And that's the legacy that they want to leave, to really deeply serve people and help maybe other people not just make a transformation, but maybe avoid some of the mistakes or pains or issues that they have experienced. You can say, okay, maybe you want to steer away from this and steer towards this, but also to inspire and motivate others to reach for their own success.
Well, it's been beautiful conversation, and I want to check your book out for sure. What is the name of the book again?
It's called Unleash Your Impact. It's not quite launched yet. It's a fun read because, there's so many case studies in there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it will, you won't relate to all of them, but you'll relate to some of them. So,
yeah. I more and more, I just love the story, like the vulnerability stories.
Yeah.
That's what we do, but also it usually almost every story helps me in some way. And so,
yeah,
that's
exactly.
what I'm learning in this Family Wars book, and I'm sure there's more in your book. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Amy. We appreciate your time and all that you're doing to serve the world and everyone that wants to tell a story.
Well, thank you both for having me on your awesome podcast. It was really fun to kind of go all different directions and touch on a lot of different things. So that was fun.
Thank you for tuning in. And to stay in touch, email us at info@businessaddictspodcast.com.